Welcome to the Inside UMSL podcast. I'm your host, Nate, and I'm here today with Dr. Sandra Langeslag, Associate Professor of Psychological Sciences and Director of the Neurocognition of Emotion and Motivation Lab at University of Missouri, St. Louis. Well, hello, Sandra. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to know your story. Can you tell us your background? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I'm originally from the Netherlands, and I did my undergrad in the Netherlands in psychology, and then I also did my PhD in Holland in psychology, and then I did another postdoc for a year, and then I moved to the University of Maryland to do another postdoc for 3 years, and then to UMSL.
Okay, cool. And then where did you go to? What did you study while you were in these different universities?
So for my PhD, the main project was emotional memory in younger and older adults, but I was already interested in romantic love, and so I did that sort of on the side. So thankfully my supervisor allowed me to do sort of my hobby research on the side as long as I did my other work. And so I've always had supervisors that allowed me to do this. And then when I became a professor at UMSL, I could finally really focus on that.
So where do you think your interest in how the brain works when it comes to romantic love came from? Is it something you've had since you were a child?
So I was always interested in the sciences. So even in high school, I did chemistry, physics, math, biology, things like that. And then I didn't really know what to do for my undergrad until I saw a biological psychology textbook. And then I was like, wow, is that a thing? And then people said, yeah, that's a whole field of psychology. And then I was like, that's what I want to do.
You were sparked by a textbook?
Yes.
That's super interesting. Yeah. So at what age do you think you started to narrow in on being interested in biological psychology?
So that was when I was 19, I think. Yep. And then throughout my studies, I started to become interested in the science of love and tie that in with biological psychology.
Okay, so you keep talking about the science of love. What can you explain that for someone like me who may not fully understand what that is? What is the science of love?
Well, so here's the thing. Most people experience love at some point in their life, and many people experience love many more times in their life. And so we all feel like we're experts. But if we really want to understand it, we need to do like proper scientific research on love, for example. And so we need to make sure that we actually test our beliefs or hypotheses that we have and like put them really to scientific tests to see if they're true. Because some of my findings are like, well, yeah, of course, right? But at least then I've scientifically shown that our hunch is correct.
Yeah.
And others of my findings are like, wow, that's not what I would expect. But apparently that's the case. If you actually study it, that's what it shows.
So what are the things that you are specifically studying here at UMSL?
Yeah, so my research is basically 4 research lines. So I study how love improves cognition, and cognition is the way we think. So for example, attention and memory. And I've shown that if the information has to do with your beloved, then you have more attention and better memory for that information. I'm also studying the flip side of that. How does that then distract people from doing other things, such as their work or their homework? And so I've also shown now in a couple of studies that people that are in love are distracted from other tasks because they're thinking about their beloved. And then I'm also studying how people can change how in love they are by using cognitive strategies, so by thinking certain things.
Yeah.
And I've shown that people think they can't change how in love they are, but when I ask them to do certain strategies in the lab, they can actually. So people can make themselves a little more or a little less in love by thinking certain things. And then the latest research line that I'm now studying is how love compares to drug addiction. Because several papers have been written about the striking similarities between the two, but we don't have a lot of data that actually directly compares the two, and so that's what I'm trying to do.
So you're on the forefront of something.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, what does it look like? Is this more of a study on like seeing inside the brain as these decisions are made, or is it noticing the effects of it through kind of the outward physical?
So oftentimes we collect 2 types of data, and so one type of data has to do with the subjective experience of people, and you don't know what someone is experiencing unless you ask them. Yeah. So we usually ask them, for example, by giving us ratings, like how in love do you feel, how positive or negative do you feel, or we give them certain questionnaires that they use to report on basically their subjective experience.
Yeah.
And then the other part that we do in our lab is we measure brain waves, and so we put a cap on someone's head that measures electrophysiological responses to certain stimuli. So we often show them pictures of their beloved and friends and strangers, for example. And then we see how the brain responds to those, to that sort of information. We can see how quickly the brain responds, and we can see what cognitive processes are going on. So certain attentional processes or memory processes. And that's sort of more the objective response to to your beloved.
Yeah. So there's a way to kind of look at the brain and tell someone is in romantic love.
Well, so that's sort of a diagnostics, right?
Okay.
So we can't. But we usually look at the group level. So we say, we have a group of people that are in love, and on average, this is how their brain responds to a picture of their beloved, for example.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so the different pictures, it's a picture of the beloved, and what other things are they shown?
So we can see in those brain waves, we can see that what I just said, that people have better attention for information that has to do with their beloved, and even two types of attention. So there's an early automatic attention that we have for evolutionarily relevant stimuli, such as SNCs, but also for the beloved. And then there's this other later type of attention, which is more sustained attention, that we have for all sorts of information that is emotional, whether it's unpleasant or pleasant. And we also show that people have that type of attention also more for their beloved than other people.
That's interesting. So you show photos of the beloved in snakes.
We have not done that in the same study, but maybe we should.
I'm trying to give new ideas.
Yeah, thank you.
So love is a very big and often debated topic, and people use the word love for all kinds of things. What are your thoughts on how people use the word love compared to what you've been doing research on?
Yeah. Well, so this is a big problem. So scientists cannot agree on how many types of love there are. I think we all agree there's different types of love, but we don't agree on how many, and we don't agree on which ones. And that makes research on love very difficult, right? Because if I write a paper and I use a certain name for a type of love, then another researcher may have a different idea what I mean by that term, or maybe they study the same type of love, but they use a different name for it, so we don't know we're talking about the same thing. If I ask my participants, do you feel passionate love for this person? I don't know if they're interpreting that word the same as I am, and so that just makes it very complicated. But I think that's one of the challenges that the field needs to overcome to really get better at getting a scientific understanding of romantic love.
In your idea, what would be a way of kind of standardizing that?
Just a lot more research and a lot more discussion. Yeah.
And what drew you specifically to studying romantic love?
Yeah, so when I was about to start my undergrad, I first got very much heartbroken. And then a few months later, I fell in love with someone new, and then I started my undergrad in psychology. And so I was really always thinking about what's happening to me, what's happening in my body and my brain that makes me feel these two very different feelings. And then whenever I had to write a paper for a class, I always tried to see if I could write it about the neurobiology of love to see if it could fit the assignment. And that's how I found out that there weren't a whole lot of scientific studies on romantic love. And then I ultimately decided that I'm going to just study that and try to generate the scientific knowledge.
Oh, what's a surprising thing that you found in your study? Something that you came into it not thinking like, oh, this is something that actually happens for someone who's in romantic love?
Yeah, so this has to do with that idea that whether and how you can change how in love you are. So we have a large body of literature on emotion regulation. So we know we can change our emotions, we can make them more intense or less intense. And then I thought, well, then let's see if we can apply that to love, because that would be super useful. And then I was writing some grant proposals, and then basically the reviewers would say, we can't give you money to do this because people cannot regulate their love feelings. And I was like, but we don't know because we haven't tested it yet. So you need to give me the money so I can do the study. And then maybe the answer is people can't, but then at least we know, right?
Yeah.
I ended up doing the studies anyway. And I also first asked participants, through questionnaires and things like that, if they thought they could change how in love they were. And it turns out people don't think they can do this, just like the reviewers, right?
Yeah.
But then I had some strategies that I found in the emotion regulation literature. I adapted them so that I thought maybe they would change how in love people were. I had people do that in the lab, and then it turned out people can change how in love they are. So reviewers, scientists think that you can't do it. People themselves think they can't do it, but we can. And I think this is super useful, and we need to tell people about this so that they can use these strategies to their advantage.
Yeah, that would have been great for me this summer when I had my heart broken.
Right.
Yeah. So how could your findings help people in long-term relationships after a breakup?
So I've shown that, so this is well known that love feelings decline over time, even in happy relationships.
Yeah.
And so I've shown that by thinking positively about your partner, in that case, your long-term partner, or thinking about positive aspects of the relationship, such as, we have the same values or the same hobbies, or positive future scenarios, like, we'll get married and live happily ever after, that increases love feelings. So that can be helpful in long-term relationships to sort of counteract that decline of love feelings over time.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side, I've shown that negatively thinking about the beloved, the relationship, or the future can decrease love feelings for someone. And so this could be helpful in, for heartbreak, for example, if someone doesn't love you back, or maybe they broke up with you. I've also shown that fantasizing about having sex with your partner increases sexual desire for that partner, which can also be useful in long-term relationships, because we also know that sexual desire tends to decline over time, or there just may just be a mismatch between the two partners.
Yeah.
And I've also shown that distraction makes people feel less bad after a breakup. So that's more an emotion regulation strategy, but that is something that people can use too.
What are some areas that you think still need more exploration when it comes to studying love?
Oh, a lot. So I think a lot of the research so far has really focused on relationships. So they've studied romantic relationships, and that's very important. But I tend to focus more on the love feeling. So just how does someone feel sort of on the inside?
Yeah.
And so I don't care all that much usually if people are in a relationship with the person they are in love with, because sometimes they're just not. And I also just test one of the people. So I just get one person in the lab, I ask them, are you in love? And then I test them.
Yeah.
Whereas the relationship research often gets the couples into the lab and then tests, for example, how they interact or communicate. And again, that's very important, and that yields very useful information. But I feel like the field is ignoring the love feeling, which I think is also important.
Now, with the love feeling, you spoke a lot about the brain. Do you study at all any other biomarkers that might be there with love?
Yeah, I have not. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of physiological responses when you're in love, especially that early stage love. So you get like the butterflies and the blushing and nervousness and everything. I just don't have the equipment to study that.
So your focus is intently on the effects in the brain itself.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. So you're the director of the Neurocognition of Emotion and Motivation Lab. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that is?
Yep. So that's my lab. So that's me and then all my graduate students and undergraduate students. And I call it the Neurocognition of Emotion and Motivation Lab because I've always been interested in the interaction between emotion and cognition. So, for example, emotional memory, emotional attention, emotion regulation. And also my research on love fits within that. Yeah. About 90% of my research is on romantic love, but then the other 10% is about emotion in general. Yeah. So we also study emotional phases, for example, or emotional memory.
What do you mean by emotional phases?
So I've done some studies on, for example, when you smile, whether you show your teeth or not, and when you're angry, whether you show your teeth or not, how people differently experience those types of facial expressions.
Yeah. That's super interesting. So what does it look like in the lab? Because in my head, I'm thinking of like a Disney-fied version of a lab. Can you kind of break that down for me?
Yeah, so we have two rooms, one smaller room where the participant sits in front of a monitor, and then a slightly bigger room, which is sort of the control room that has a bunch of computers. It has a sink, so we can wash our equipment, like the cap that we put on people's heads. And so that's where we sit while the participant does their task in the testing room.
That's really cool. Do you guys wear lab coats?
We don't, no.
Oh, okay. I was hoping for lab coats too. Man. So what courses do you teach here at UMSL?
Yeah, so I teach an upper-level undergraduate course on emotions and the brain, and another one on human learning and memory. I also teach a graduate course that's called the Cognitive and Affective Seminar, and I teach the undergraduate statistics course for psychology students. So that's the first statistics course that these students take, and every psychology student has to take it. Yeah.
Do you have a lot of cross-collaboration between departments when it comes to the courses?
So especially that statistics course is also taken by a lot of nursing students or biology or social work students. So there's a lot of non-psychology students in that course. Yep.
That's really cool.
So, and especially my emotions and the brain class and also my statistics class, I use a lot of my research as examples. And so I teach about my research and I give examples of my research, and it's really a fun way for me to show the relevance of the course material to research and also just a bigger scientific knowledge.
And you're teaching it as the research is still evolving?
Yeah. So oftentimes they get like the latest in classroom.
That's really cool. Oh man, I love that. So with your research, you have students involved in every step of the process?
Yep. So I work with both graduate students and undergraduate students in my lab. And so undergraduate students are mostly involved in recruiting participants and then testing the participants and then, for example, entering the data and analyzing data and also presenting the data, for example, through posters at conferences. Whereas graduate students are involved really from like the start of the study to the very end. So we think about what are we going to study, and then we do literature review, and we get ethics permission, and then programming the experiments, and then recruiting and testing, and then analyzing data. And they also write the paper and also do presentations on the study.
Have there been some interesting studies that the students have put forth that come to your mind?
Yeah, so I'm currently doing a study with a new graduate student on the differences and similarities between, we call it sort of real life love versus parasocial love. And parasocial love is people that falling in love with celebrities or book characters or things like that. And so that was totally her idea. So that was very inspiring.
That is a super cool idea.
Yep.
What is exciting about research being done at higher ed research institutions? So like what is it about doing your research here at UMSL that excites you so much?
So what is really wonderful and why I like this job so much is that you have total freedom to study whatever you want. And I love that. I can just wake up one morning and think, this is what I'm going to study. And then I do it. So total freedom.
Yeah. So what are some of the events that you participate in throughout the year that you think are really interesting?
Yeah, so research-wise, there is usually a neuroscience showcase in the fall and an undergraduate research symposium in the spring, where both faculty and graduate and undergraduate students present their research. And so that's always very exciting to attend.
That's super cool. And it's like a delivery of a speech in front of other people, or?
So usually there's two types of presentations usually. So either it's a talk or it's a poster presentation. And so if you have a poster presentation, you print a big poster and then you stand next to it and talk about your work with other people.
That's really fun. I thought a poster presentation was something else, but it really is just printing out a poster and speaking on what you see.
Yes.
So if you have a free weekend in St. Louis, what are you going to do?
So we love to try new restaurants, and we also love to go back to restaurants that we go to all the time. And we also love to go for boba tea, the bubble tea. So we have our favorites, but then when we find a new one, we need to try it out and see how it compares to our favorites. And then I also really love the parks, just the playgrounds, but also the parks.
So you're still doing research with bubble tea?
Right. Yeah, essentially, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you said there are restaurants that you go back to. Can you give me like one or two of those restaurants?
Can we advertise that?
I mean, it's for me personally.
Oh, for you personally. Yeah. Okay. Miranchito, Three Kings, Tres Reyes.
Oh, man. Okay. All right. When we're done, I'm going to need to put all these in my Google Maps so I can go to them on my own tonight. I'm going to have a fun time. So if you could spend a day as a student in any other department other than your own, what department would you pick and why?
I mean, my love for biology, I would love to do some biology classes. Yep.
Would you do more along like the animal side of biology or more along the human?
More the neuroscience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And then what's a hobby or interest you have that students might be surprised to find out?
Well, I used to be a salsa dancer.
Really?
Yeah.
How long were you a salsa dancer?
So this was... I was a dancer all my childhood, but more ballet and then Latin and ballroom dancing, and then I switched to salsa for my 20s or something.
That's really cool. And then the last question I have, what's a piece of advice that you've been using recently that's kind of been getting you through everything you're working on?
So in general, and I often tell students this too in my advising meetings, you don't have to decide today what you want to do for the rest of your life, because that's daunting and impossible. You just have to decide today if what you're doing today you still want to do tomorrow, and if that's the case, keep going. If someday you're like, I do not want to keep doing this, then you need to switch it up. But
I like that. That's really cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been really fun.